Welcome, you guys, to a wonderful live stream on this. Happened on Friday night. You're probably, you're either here hanging on live stream or you're watching it afterwards. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the Canon EOS R. And, I mean, there's lots of people talking about it, and that's great because it's neat to see Canon do a full-frame mirrorless camera, and I have the baby version, the Canon M50, and this is what I've been using the last 6 months to create a ton of different stuff, and it's wild value. I think that's the biggest thing to be said about this. If you've seen any of my reviews or any of my videos that I put out there, the M50 for like $700 US, what it does is actually astounding for the fact that it's got great autofocus. It's got a flip-out selfie screen, which is massive for doing all sorts of things. It's got the microphone input jack, so you can plug that in there. You've got the adapters that you can use all of the lenses. It shoots 1080p at 60 frames per second. With a crop, it can shoot some 4K. That 4K does look great, provided it's sitting on a tripod and not doing a whole lot. And the footage that comes out of here just looks good, unless you get into higher ISO, and then it all kind of falls apart. But when you've got enough light, it's a fascinating camera for like $700. And sure enough, what ends up happening is Canon's like, hey, we got to get into the full-frame mirrorless game because Sony has been there, and they have been crushing it lately. And so, for those of us who, for me, the reason that I ended up picking this camera was because I need a selfie screen. So, we do lots of vlogging and filming myself, and it saves me so much time. And I liked my Sony before this, but it just didn't have that, and it was costing me too much time. And, before that I had Panasonic, which the autofocus was the thing that killed there, again, trying to film myself. And before that I had Nikons, and they were beautiful full-frame photo cameras, but for video, and so we've run the gamut. And for me, I've basically, once I got the M50, and I just settled on a few lenses, and I sold most all of my Sony stuff, and I've had this, like, cash chunk hidden away in a bank account that is ready to go for the next camera that, for me, I want to be able to take great photos with. I want to be able to up my video quality, especially in low light where this struggles, as well as maybe compress that background a little bit more, and just kind of have like one camera that can kind of do it all. And so Canon, I didn't think Canon was going to be the one. I thought it was going to be Sony. The Sony A7 III is rumored to have been released. In fact, it's interesting. I'm in this group with a number of other YouTubers, and there was kind of this chatter going on in there about how Sony had a big press event back in, I think it was late September, where they flew a whole bunch of people out, asked them to take a few days off work, flew them all these reviewers out for a big Sony press conference, and they announced one lens. That was all that they announced. They announced the 24mm G Master lens. And you don't typically do that unless you have something big to announce. But I think what happened was Sony has apparently had the A7 III ready to go for a while now. But the problem is the Sony A7 III has been selling so well, and it's a great all-around camera that does a ton, that if they released it, they would eat into the sales of that when it's already dominating. But then I think they were starting to feel the pressure to go, oh, Nikon's coming out with two mirrorless cameras, a Z6, Z7, Z6, or Z7, depending where you live. And then Canon's coming out with their full-frame mirrorless, and then Panasonic is going to be announcing their full-frame mirrorless. We got to do something. And so I think they had the press event, and then when they found out what actually was released from the competitors, they went, oh, we're fine. And it is interesting, and this is something that is difficult for people to wrap their heads around, is the difference between a spec sheet and real-world usage of a camera. Because when I looked at the M50 on the spec sheet, I thought, why would I ever buy this? Like Sony would crush this, 10 days out of the week. But when you actually begin to use it and there are the things that you actually need, you end up finding out that, practically you can have all the things on the spec sheet, but what actually matters is the things you're actually going to use. And that is very different from what you think you might use. And you end up finding out that, I can live without 120 frames per second slow motion and just do 60 frames per second slow motion. Do I wish I had 120? Sure. But can I live without it? Yes. In-body image stabilization, do I wish I had it? Yes. And there are some days where I feel like I can't live without it because digital image stabilization does not look as good. But then there's gimbals and there's other ways around it, or just being a lot smoother handheld, because any kind of stabilization, when you start panning, starts looking jittery in body or in camera. It's better to actually turn it off and just find a way to be smooth as you move in slow motion. Anyway, there's lots of things on a spec sheet. And so I think right now Sony looks so good on a spec sheet that they're going, we don't really have, a whole lot to do. But then there's some practical things around the Sonys. Primarily for me is a flip-out screen, which some people are like, hey, there's just not enough of a demand for professionals to need a flip-out screen, to which I would say, what about the Panasonic GH series? GH5, GH5S, the GH4, the GH3, the GH2, I think, maybe all the way back, all of the Panasonics, and there are a ton of professionals who are using the Panasonics with the flip-out screen. So, it ends up kind of being a big thing. But so Canon announces the EOS R, and I'm sure most of people on this channel are familiar. You've already seen, the spec sheets and the different things. And for me, I almost 3 months ago pulled the trigger on moving from the M50 to buying a Canon 60 Mark II with, ultra-wide angle lens and a couple other things to go, that I get a full frame, so I get a little bit more bokeh. The low light on the 60 Mark II is better than the M50. And other than that, they're basically similar. Like, this technically shoots 4K, but not really. But otherwise, the 60 Mark II and this is very similar. 60 frames per second slow motion, digital image stabilization, similar video codecs. Essentially it just gives you more lower light, full frame photos and then full frame video look. But at the end of the day, what I just couldn't justify spending that kind of money on a camera that didn't do 4K, that didn't do 120 frames per second, didn't have in-body image stabilization, didn't have all these things that I felt like Sony had in it right there. And so I didn't pull the trigger on it. I've just been holding on to this. But, there's some other things when we talk about the Sonys that maybe doesn't get enough credit, which is like my A6500 from Sony, which is brilliant on a spec sheet, actually has some issues. One, the rolling shutter in 4K is really bad, so you get like the jello and you get the lines and different things. When you're shooting 120 frames per second or you're shooting 4K, the screen on the back is so dim that it is unusable outdoors. You have no idea what you're seeing. And those are things that you don't necessarily see on the spec sheet, but when practical usage, and sometimes that's where I find Canon doesn't show as well on the spec sheet, but colors are great, and they just kind of work, and the autofocus is really smooth, and it's better, and, all those kinds of things. So EOS R, spec-wise, 4K with a big crop, 1.7. For me, I have the Sigma 18-35, and I'm shooting crop now anyway, so I go, oh, well, okay, that should be fine. So, I would just basically, the 4K would be cropped with this. So, not the end of the world, but then you're getting good quality, high bit rate, 1080p in kind of a full frame, nice width, camera. But you're still kind of the same thing, 60 frames per second, no 120, except at 720p. Nobody cares about that. But, 24 and 30 frames per second, that stuff should look pretty good. And the 4K, for me, I use 4K, but the only time I use 4K is typically on a stand shooting something like this. And so that's fine for what I'm doing. I'm really looking for the ultimate vlogging camera. Selfie screen, great in low light and lots of different challenging situations. I do want something with some kind of stabilization, but the 16-35 f4 ends up kind of filling that void put on that camera, provided the adapter works fairly well. It's got a microphone input and a headphone jack, which, is kind of nice. It has the 10-bit 422 HDMI output, which for me, I'm just not going to use. Like, I would love to say that I use it, and if you're a serious filmmaker, that is cool. And maybe if I got into the right setup where it was a little bit more static, it'd be worth the trouble, and you could get a little, like, Ninja or Atomos, whatever. I don't know why I'm drawing blank on that. But you could do that. But for me, I'm not going to. But it does have S-Log, and I think there would be situations, not S-Log, C-Log, Canon log, where I would use that, where it's got the really flat picture. Because, again, when I'm vlogging, what I don't want to have to worry about is that the camera is in focus, that all of the exposure is perfectly dialed in, that the sound is at the right level. Like, you just don't have time for that. What you want to worry about is delivering whatever you're talking about to the camera. And that's something where C-Log can help save you if you maybe don't have your settings perfect. It's got the selfie screens. You can set up those shots and be able to do that fairly quickly, be able to set it up. Okay, good. And then kind of go and you can kind of sneak a peek every once in a while. And, obviously the microphone input jack, but different things. I don't want to have to think about it. And in that way, that camera actually checks a lot of those boxes. Some other interesting things that people don't know, another barrier for me to buy the 60 Mark II is that in video, it only has 2 modes. Same with the M50, only 2 modes. You have full manual, which you can put in auto ISO, but that doesn't necessarily work all the time, or an auto mode. And the auto mode on this camera is super dumb. Like, it's really dumb sometimes, where I'm shooting at 24 frames per second, and it's putting the shutter speed to 1/30th. For some reason. And even in situations where I'm like, you don't need to be at 1/30th, but you can see like you're shooting at 1/30th. Why are you at 1/30th? Like, you could be at 1/25th or you could be at 150, but you're at 130. Like, it just doesn't make sense. So, but what they're missing is what Sony and Panasonic have is an aperture priority and a shutter priority mode in video, and those cameras didn't have it. Well, good news, the EOS R does add those 2 modes. And that's really handy because for me, for vlogging, I don't mind overcranking, like where your shutter speed gets a little bit high. I'm okay with that as a way to, be able to adjust for the light. So I'd like to be able to put in an aperture priority and say, hey, hold it at f4 so the background stays blurry. And if I'm moving into too bright or too dark of situations, I don't want it to crank up the aperture. I'd actually rather have it crank up the shutter speed and be able to manage it that way with the auto ISO or be able to lock in your ISO or have a little bit more control. So I'm happy that it has that. And so I go for vlogging right now. It kills me that there is no other option for a high-spec camera like an A7 III that will give me a selfie screen to be able to vlog with, because I just cannot enjoy myself vlogging to the same degree when I don't have that flip-out screen, when I don't have good autofocus, and those are 2 things that are critical for me. So EOS R on the spec sheet, I guess, do I get one? Well, I want a full-frame camera that I can vlog with. So it's the only option. Now, will it be really good? I think it could be good. I mean, there's adapters because there's just not many lenses yet. They don't have a ultra wide angle native RF mount lens, which would be super cool if they did, because it would be smaller. And the 16 to 35 f4 is like 4 years old, and it's got the ultrasonic motor. I don't know how well it's going to work with the adapter, but it'll also be a little bit unbalanced because of the weight moving forward with the adapter. But I think, what, it might be a good option. So I guess maybe I'll buy it. And I don't know that I've ever been less excited to spend my money on a camera, even though like it helps me kind of move forward, but I don't really get anything over this other than, okay, an aperture priority mode and full frame. I think that's it. That's it. I mean, and the full frame is going to mean better low light performance, a blurry background, more dynamic range in photos and things. But I mean, for like vlogging, it doesn't. It gives me some better low light performance in aperture priority mode. That's what I get. And the other thing that kills me is I know that they're going to release a higher spec one in like 6 months. And that one will probably finally do like, here, this one has full frame 4K. And I don't think it'll have in-body image stabilization, but they might give us real 120 frames per second. And yes, it would be a little bit more money, but it would be fun to be able to get into that. But yeah, I don't know. I think I was going to buy the 60 Mark II. It's just like, hey, this is a decent all around, take some nice photos, like better photos for full frame. The video quality will be better because, it's okay, better. But the early reviews of the video quality of the EOS R are good. Like, looks good. So good is good, I guess. I don't know. I'm going to jump into the comments. That was a lot of me talking. But EOS R, do I think I'll get it? Yeah, I think I might. Sony this month in October is supposed to be announcing what I assume is a successor to the A6500, like the next level up. That's going to be kind of like a mini A9, they say. So, we're probably going to see some crazy fast photo speeds, but I hope it gets a Z battery, like bigger battery, better 4K, less rolling shutter, 4K 60 frames per second, supposed to be in that thing. And if it has a selfie screen, I'm kind of waiting. Like I'm not going to buy an EOS R until I find out what the deal is with that. But it's still a crop sensor, which there's nothing wrong with the crop sensor. And the low light on Sony is always really good, and even the A6500 low light was a lot better than the low light on this. So it's good, but it still doesn't have that full frame look. Like there's the look of full frame with the extra blurry backgrounds and things, like it's nice. But the Sony 10 to 18 millimeter f4 is a great vlogging lens. It would pair very well with that, and it would be good and it's image stabilized and all that. But I'm going to wait and see what that is, but it still isn't full frame. I want that Sony A7 S3, which I don't know if I finished that thought, but it's probably not coming until next year when they get to see how Panasonic is shaping up and until Canon puts out something. Because right now, other than them, like they don't need to put out a camera, because the A7 III beats the pants off all these cameras on the spec sheet unless you need a 10-bit HDMI out, which now Canon and Nikon do, which is interesting, and the Sonys apparently don't do it. So anyway, interesting stuff. Let's hop into the comments here. Sergio Sal says, and also have a Canon M50, thinking about upgrading to this new EOS R. Well, yeah, interesting. Bernard Rieger says, have a 5D Mark IV and pre-ordered the EOS R, which, I think, it's interesting because it's a 5D Mark IV sensor, but you're getting a few, I think, more features in some ways, and, I mean, some more video stuff and the flip-out screen and stuff. Like, yeah, I think handling-wise, it could make some sense. Now, there's something where I like for photos. I actually love having a big full-frame camera with the grip, on big glass on it. Something about that, to me, when I'm taking photos feels good, but for video, no thanks. So I like the compromise of what it is. My buddy's in Toronto right now. He might be flying back already, where Canon gave him the EOS R, and he got to play with the 28 to 70, I think it is, the f2 lens, and it's just apparently massive and heavy. But to me, it's not really a good video lens. If the camera had in-body stabilization, because the lens doesn't have stabilization, then okay, now we're on to something, but it doesn't. So you can turn on the digital IS, and I mean, you can still do some nice things with that. I mean, that's kind of 18 to 35 doesn't have digital IS, and you can do some cool things with it. So, it'll be interesting to see, but big, and it's expensive. So that's cool. Alpha Bravo Cheesecake, loving that cage you got on the M50. I also do really enjoy this because you just get more to grip and hold on to, as well as when you've got a bigger lens like the 18 to 35 on here. It's nice because it just counterbalances with a little bit more weight on the back end, and overall just feels like it's a lot more sturdy in the hand, which is cool. So Alpha Bravo Cheesecake says, so many cameras, so little time. It's so frustrating to me in this day and age with all of these wild, crazy cameras out there that you can't just have a single one that checks the boxes that I want checked, which I don't think are that egregious. Good autofocus, audio input jack, selfie screen, in-body image stabilization, which, even then I'd be like, nah, and shoots 4K, proper 4K. It's that's too much to ask. Fuji XT3 checks a lot of boxes, but no selfie screen. But exciting to see what Fuji's doing. Panasonic checks a good chunk of boxes, but their autofocus is no good. Nikon, same thing, autofocus, just not there yet. Also no selfie screens on the more serious models. Canon, not really doing the whole 4K thing, not doing the in-body image stabilization thing. They're getting closer, but then they're not doing the super slow motion and some of the other fancier features that, the Sonys are doing. And then Sony's just no selfie screens, just pull my hair out. My head is so itchy with this toque. There's no here. DJ genre, sorry. I'm not sure how to say DJ AJ on genre. Anyway, what made you go live at midnight, LOL? I was just I was out with some friends, we were playing pool. And I got home and I was like, I want to go live. I don't know why. I'm just want to go live. And what's funny is I'm the great thing about YouTube is there's always people who are awake. We got people here. They're awake. No, woke. That's not, no, I don't think I can say that. But, you guys are awake. So anyway, great hanging out here. Daniel Schiffer, I heard Max Pacioretty uses an EOS R. That's funny. He plays on the Vegas Golden Knights hockey. Woo! Hockey. It's back here somewhere. Over there, hockey. Vegas Golden Knights stick. They sent it to us. That's kind of cool. DJ, okay. Oh, so you went live to ignore us. You could have recorded a video and up it. What? No, I'm not ignoring you. I just had to I was on a roll there. I'm sorry. I was on a roll. That's all. On a roll. Not ignoring you. Not ignoring you. Getting through the comments. Bernard Rieger, the EOS R isn't perfect. Sony and Co offer IBIS full frame 4K 60 frames per second. Close. Not there yet. 4K they do. 120 frames per second, full HD, and 2 card slots. But when you hold the EOS R, film yourself, see the dual pixel autofocus, gorgeous Canon colors, you'll love it. And again, that's what we were saying before. Is sometimes Canon, they don't match up on spec sheets, but they work really well for creating videos. And that's what you need at the end of the day, is a tool that helps you create videos easily. And sometimes I think we trade some of those specs things for the intangibles, where Canon is still good at engineering some things you didn't even really realize that you needed or thought of, and so I'll give them that. I'm not like a massive Canon fanboy, but using them I go, oh yeah, right, these kind of work. So Bill Rear says, very frustrating. I'm looking to buy a camera, replace my T3i. Don't you think they are getting way too complicated? I guess it depends what you need or don't need. Some of these tools, I mean, they're giving more tools that potentially can push the craft forward, but also can distract from the purity, I guess, of the craft. It's the same thing where you can add all sorts of CGI and special effects and different things into movies. Does it make the movies any more interesting? No, I mean, you still need a good story. So, I think sometimes the complications can be there, but once you learn the tools, I love body's image stabilization. Now, there's limitations to it, but I like it. I liked 120 frames per second. I think that's, kind of neat and handy. I'd like to be able to shoot 4K 60 frames per second for certain things in certain situations, lots of that. But at the end of the day, too, sometimes I do go, there is a beauty here in this Canon M50 where it's not that complicated. It's basically like your T3i with a couple bells and whistles, but it's similar. It's like, put it on 1080p, 24 frames per second, and go tell a story. Your T3i wouldn't be able to do this, but put it at 60 frames per second, shoot some slow motion, take it home. The footage looks pretty good as long as, it wasn't too dark. And so you try and keep a faster lens on it if you can. And it takes some nice photos, too. With a good lens, it takes great photos. So it's not that complicated, and it just kind of works, which is special. There is something special about that, but I don't know. Like for me, it's a hobby and maybe a little bit of an obsession. I've found myself lately on the Canon rumor site and Sony Alpha rumor site, multiple times through the day, refreshing, just waiting for a hit. Just need a little hit, something, to feel it, to find out a secret that will finally go yes, the camera I've been dreaming of is finally here. And I know that whatever I pick up, there will still be things where I'm like, oh, this is annoying, or that's annoying, or that's annoying. But, it is what it is. So it's going to move us a little bit closer. But anyway, that's 30 minutes, I think, on a night, and it is quite late, so I might go to bed. Anyway, thank you guys for hanging out. Always appreciate it. So, late on a Friday night, probably not the ideal time to stream on YouTube, but I had fun. Hope you had fun. Anyway, I'm going to talk to you guys later. As always, if you ever have questions or comments or things, you can find me on Twitter or on Instagram, or those are probably two best places. And I respond to basically all the messages. So shoot me a note if you want me to answer something. I'm happy to do it. And I will see you guys later.